Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. My name is Betty Cruz, and I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. Our mission is to convene and connect people around global issues to build a thriving, competitive, and inclusive Pittsburgh. And our vision is for a globally minded and globally connected world that is equitable and just for all. And on this point of equity and justice, we would like to acknowledge that today marks 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. As we speak about the importance of mindfulness, compassion, and mental health, it is necessary to acknowledge that the Black experience in the US and around the world continues to be harmed by trauma and violence. This directly impacts the emotional and mental health of both Black youth and adults and hurts our societies as a whole. We cannot be globally minded if we are not also striving to be anti-racist. That means taking deliberate steps every day, all of us. If this last year has taught us anything, it is that we are far more connected than we realized, that every single one of us has mental health needs, and that mindfulness and compassion are within reach for all of us. We also want to take a moment to thank our co-sponsor for this event, Vibrant Pittsburgh, whose mission is to build a thriving and inclusive Pittsburgh region by attracting, retaining, and elevating a diversity of talent. Finally, 2021 marks the Council's 90th birthday. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter to learn about the ways we will be celebrating later this summer. Now on to our program. We're thrilled to welcome Scott Shute as today's keynote. Scott is at the intersection of the workplace and ancient wisdom traditions. He has been an active advocate for customers and employees in the technology space for over 20 years, with roles ranging from sales, customer advocacy, and customer service leadership. In his current role as head of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn, love it, Scott blends his lifelong practice and passion with his practical leadership and operations experience. His mission is to change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. Following his remarks, we will open the floor to questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining on Zoom, feel free to use the chat feature if you're more comfortable with that. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can submit your questions in the comments. Without further delay, Scott, please take it away.
Thanks, Betty, and hi, friends. So good to be with you. I'm Scott. I'm in San Jose, California this morning for me. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I thought we'd talk a little bit about mindfulness and compassion in the workplace. It's a different kind of thing. And I'll save my story for how I got here for another time. But the short version is I've had a career as a customer service executive, but I've also had a practice since I was 13, been teaching since I was in college. And a few years ago, it became obvious that we needed to do this at LinkedIn. And by this, I mean, create this role. And so a few years ago, with the great help of and support of our CEO and head of HR, created this role, head of mindfulness and compassion, where there's two parts of my job, mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. But let's talk about what that actually means just a little bit. On the mindfulness side, the types of things that we do are all secular in nature, right? Well, some of us come from these wisdom traditions and come maybe from a spiritual bent. Everything that we do at work, you can think of it as mental exercise, and the corollary is physical exercise. And so when we talk about mindfulness, I'm really talking about awareness, self-awareness, awareness of others, awareness of my surroundings. And we all need that at work, right? So the what first, we're offering workshops on building resilience. We're offering workshops on growth mindset. Pre-COVID, we had 40 or 50 different meditation sessions every week across the globe. For scale, LinkedIn's about a 15 or 16,000 person company globally. We offer an app that we use. We give everybody access to this app called Wise at Work from our friends at Wisdom Labs. And it's an app that is totally relevant for someone who's working. In addition to things like meditation, it's also things like, hey, I'm about to go give feedback or get feedback, and I need to get in the right, mindset to do that. What do I need to do? We do things like an annual 30-day challenge and get people, excited about the app and doing it with their friends. and essentially mainstreaming it, right? Just getting a steady drip of these mental exercises and this idea of mindfulness, just to make it as normal as physical exercise. About once a quarter, we'll do a mini retreat for, a couple hours, maybe 90 minutes now that it's Zoom, and introduce a number of different practices. We're trying to give somebody something for every step of their way, wherever they are in their mindfulness practice. But you might ask, why? Why would a company, any company, but a company like LinkedIn care? Why offer mindfulness? Like, how does this fit into the work environment? Well, to answer that question fully, and I know that you guys probably already are believers, but to answer this question fully, let's look at the history of work, a brief history of work for just a second. If we rewind to the times when we were building the pyramids in Egypt, we had kings and slaves, or later landowners and non-landowners, serfs. In other words, workers were not highly valued. This was the agrarian age, and it lasted for a long time. And then we moved into the industrial age. You might imagine people all building the same thing in a factory. And again, workers were viewed as interchangeable or not very important. And our policies and procedures reflected that. And now in the information age, a company like LinkedIn, we don't offer any hard goods. We're not selling cars or copper. We're not mining anything. We don't have production lines. All we have is our people, because our product is information. So our people by far are our biggest asset. And so it makes sense for a company to take care of its people, to invest in its people. And what we find is, just like if we have lots of people, we might offer a gym because we want people to be at their best physically. And we know that physical exercise helps reduce stress, helps you be at your best. Mental exercise or meditation is the same way. There are over 6,000 peer-reviewed papers that show that meditation reduces stress, reduces anxiety, improves the quality of our relationships, even increases our creativity. So as a company, we know that when a person is at their best, they're going to deliver even better for their teammates, for their customers. We're going to have more awareness of our customers, more awareness of our teammates. And over the long term, this is going to yield incredible results. And we knew that before COVID, but now it's even more pronounced. A recent study from the CDC showed that around 41% of respondents had some sort of mental well-being issue going on, everything from depression to trauma or stress related. 41%. And to me, the scariest, most concerning subsection of that statistic was that 11%, that's 1 in 9 people, 11% had seriously considered suicide in the last 30 days. So while meditation and these programs are not the panacea for all of these things, they do help. They help, and they've been proven to help our mental well-being. And employees are asking for these programs. In another study, Glint, which is a LinkedIn company, showed that 3/4 of employees are asking their employers to provide these types of services, more services around mental well-being. There's a quote by Mark Buttolini, who used to be the CEO of Aetna. He basically said, look, if we save one life, who cares about the money? He said it in a more colorful way. Who cares about the money? And sometimes people ask me about ROI, like what's the ROI of these mindfulness programs? And I kind of start in a different place. Do we ask what the ROI of the gym is? If we buy a new rowing machine, do we ask what the ROI is for that? Or if we turn the thermostat, from 74 degrees to 71 to make us a little more comfortable, do we ask what the ROI is? And I get it. I'm a business guy. And for now, I keep ROI in a few different ways. One is I measure customer satisfaction and consumption. In other words, if we offer a program, do people come and do they like it? But for me, the real ROI is in the anecdotes. It's in the stories that I hear. A few years ago, I was walking down the hallway This was still, I was in my old job as VP of operations at LinkedIn. It's customer service, essentially. And one of the young women who was on my team as a service agent was walking down the hallway, and my friend was with her. And my friend said, "You should tell Scott your story." And she did not want to tell Scott her story. But I overheard, I'm like, "Yeah, you should totally tell me." And so this was her story. She said, "Look, I used to think this whole mindfulness stuff was just a bunch of BS." And she said that in a more colorful way. "But look, you guys did this 30-day challenge, and it was a challenge. I like a good challenge, so I signed up for it. And what I can tell you is that now I'm on day 400 of my streak of meditating." In other words, she'd used the app for 400 days in a row. And I said, "That's amazing." She's like, "No, that's not the amazing part. Here's the amazing part. This morning, I gave a 10-minute presentation at our all hands," which for her, this was a team of 80 or 100 people. And I said, "That's great." She's like, "No, you don't get it. Like a year ago, I never would have done that. I never would have signed up to give that presentation. I wasn't ready to do that. I would have been freaking out. And even this morning, I was kind of freaking out. But I went into a conference room and I did my breathing and I settled down and I went out and I crushed it." Now later, and she had this huge smile on her face, right? She was visibly pleased. And later, I went to talk to my friends who managed this department, this group that she was in, and I asked about her, and they said, "Yeah, she has totally changed. Like, I don't know what's going on with her, but her life has totally changed." And inside, I was thinking, yeah, this is why. This is why we do this work. But still, we're evolving, right? Now, the corollary is physical exercise. And what I didn't know until recently is that physical exercise is a relatively new thing. Our grandparents didn't exercise. They worked hard, but they weren't going to the gym. They weren't doing strength training. I found this article from a magazine from 1969. And I wanted to find what the world was like when I came into it. This is the year I was born, 1969. And in this same magazine, the same consciousness of the people, there were advertisements for cigarettes with doctors in white lab coats as the pitchmen because it was a natural energy source, and articles about race and gender that would totally make us pucker today, probably get those journalists fired. In this same magazine, not that long ago, 50 years, there was an article about this swim team in the Midwest. They'd won a couple championships and the journalists went to see what was going on. And the headlines were this big: "Athletes subject themselves to self-torture in order to win." And I was thinking, what the heck? What are these guys doing? You know what they were doing that was so very strange and foreign in 1969? They were lifting weights. They were doing strength training. Now, we've come a long way since then, right? And so now everybody, or almost everybody, knows the benefits of physical exercise, knows that it makes us just better at who we are. And in the same way, we're making this progress with mental exercise, with meditation. More and more people are trying it every year. The science is already there. It's just the practice that's catching up with it. And for companies, just like we want our employees to be physically fit, we teach about hydration and sleep and all these things because we know that when our employees are at their best, the company wins too. Mindfulness is on that same journey. Now, what can we do, right? If you're listening to this as perhaps a leader and you're thinking, yeah, I don't know where to start. Here's 3 things. First, find your volunteers. Just like me, I volunteered for 3 or 4 years before this was my job. I guarantee you there are people at your company or your organization who are interested, who would love to do something, right? If they were just given the space to do so. The second one is find a partner. These things don't have to cost any money, but if you want to get started and get scale a little bit, you can find a partner like Wisdom Labs that can help you scale. And the third is leverage your existing programs. Probably, depending on the scale of your company, you already have a newsletter, or you already have classes through your gym, or you already have a wellness challenge. Just include mindfulness, meditation, and things like that. And the rest will kind of build itself. And if you are an employee, if you're an individual and you're thinking, yeah, I'm not in charge of human resources, I don't have any budget, what can I do? Again, 3 things. The first one is just to start. If you have a personal practice, bring it to work, offer to lead a session on a Thursday at 4:30. That's what I did. And the first time there was one dude there. And I'm sure he was just as terrified as I was because I never saw him again. The second is to gather your friends. As you are out there as someone who enjoys this practice, other people will follow. And then together you can build something. And then third is to find a champion. At LinkedIn, I was the champion. I was a leader at the company. At your place, find the senior most person who's willing to talk about these practices, about mental well-being, about mindfulness, and have them be the champion for your cause. The simple answer is just get started. So that's the first part of my job, is the mindfulness piece. And the second part of my role is to codify compassion. And we don't have tons of time to talk about it, but this is essentially when we're moving from just thinking about ourselves into thinking about all of us. And the easiest way to think about that is as a company, as an organization, moving from just thinking about your shareholders into thinking about all of your stakeholders, employees, customers, the broader environment around you, the community you live in, and having a great business model. Turns out that companies who act like this, who live like this, not just it feels good, and it does, turns out they're more successful. Companies who live by this code of compassion are 14 times, that's 1,400% more profitable than the standard S&P. So in other words, when we move from me to we thinking, as an individual, it makes us more successful at work. As a team, it makes us more successful, more creative, more together. But as a company, as an organization, ultimately, it leads us to more success for the long term. These are ways that we can help people build themselves to last and deal with what life has. But it's also how we build organizations to be strong. It's how we build organizations that thrive and contribute in a positive way in the world. So would love to take any questions or go deeper on any of these topics. And Betty, I'll I think come back. I think we're gonna have some Q&A at this point.
I'm back. Thank you for that, Scott. That was incredibly insightful. I love the whole moving from me to we, individual, team, organizationally, and at 1,400% increase. That's phenomenal. Anything that we were told would have that return, we would start doing immediately. So definitely a case here, and very much want to get into your book, The Full Body Yes. Before getting to the insights there, and congratulations on your first book. That's
Thank you.
An amazing feat in and of itself. Talk about putting the pandemic to use for you and for us to learn from all that you've brought forward at LinkedIn, a global organization doing this work. In an article for LinkedIn, you did say that psychological safety is the #1 factor in creating successful teams, and that a leader who acts compassionately is the way to get there.
That's right.
Can you speak more on this point of psychological safety at work?
Sure. So the research is from Google's Project Aristotle, maybe 5 or 7 years ago. They went searching for what are the biggest factors in a high-performing team. I'm not sure what they were looking for, but what came back was psychological safety. In other words, can I be myself in front of you? Can I fail and know that you're going to have my back? Or actually, I think even harder, can I win and know that you have my back? So let's say we're on a sales team and I just made 220% of quota and there's 2 weeks to go, and my friend is at 85% of quota, or vice versa. Are we really going to help each other? This is where the rubber meets the road, right? Of putting it into practice. Psychological safety means that it's those things. I can be myself. So there's lots of practices we can put in place, but it starts with the leader. Do they lead by example? But it's simple practices. So things like, we're all together on Zoom and we haven't heard from someone for a while. It's like, oh, well, Jeremy, I really want to hear what you have to say about this topic, but we haven't heard from you for a while, right? or just giving people the space, learning how to have the right language that is respectful and inclusive of all of us. It's all the things that we're learning to do, and things that are perhaps simple but really hard to put into practice.
Excellent, thank you. And I see questions are coming in from the audience. I'm going to ask you one about the book, and then start to pull in some of these questions from the audience. Great. Folks, please keep those coming in the Q&A. So with The Full Body Yes, in it, you make the case that work shouldn't be a burden that takes place outside of your real life. It should and can be a source of happiness. Can you say more about this?
Sure. Well, generally, whether it's our life, our work, or anything else, happiness, contentment, joy are mostly an inside job, meaning that, yes, we're impacted by the things around us for sure, but a large part of our personal happiness, our personal contentment happens from the inside. And so work doesn't have to be like, so we've gotten into this pattern of thinking that, the weekends are good and Monday through Friday are bad, right? Probably because the history of work that I talked about, because that for sure was the case, a long time ago. But the truth is, many of us have more choices in how we spend our time at work. Not everyone, but many of us, especially in the information age, can shift the work that we do. And so this comes down to really understanding deeply what my values are, what my likes and dislikes are, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and then using that as a filter for the work that I do. And more and more and more getting closer to that center of where my values are. And that, by definition, changes our relationship with work, because we're in charge of it, right? And for some of us, we don't have a choice in what we do, but for many of us, we have more and more choice of how our work shows up, or the investment that we put into our work. And so it's taking responsibility and changing our own lives, our own work from the inside out.
Excellent, thank you. We do have a question from Monique, who would like you to share the data around compassion and profit, and then a follow-up question from fellow Betty in the audience, who would love to have some of those examples on how you codified compassion at LinkedIn.
Perfect. Monique, the work comes from the book and the researchers from Firms of Endearment. And I think this is also the same folks that did Conscious Capitalism. So Firms of Endearment's a book from about 10 or 12 years ago, and Conscious Capitalism is a little newer than that. Let me give you some examples of codifying compassion at LinkedIn. So as an example, our head of sales will stand in front of 5,000 or 6,000 salespeople at sales kickoff and say, look, our job as salespeople is to provide long-term value. So don't sell something our customers don't need at the end of the quarter just so you can hit your quota. That's different, right? Like, that is not how I was trained as a 25-year-old salesperson when I was starting. Another example is in product review. So imagine product review. It's internally kind of like Shark Tank without all the attitude and ego. Product managers are coming into the product executive team and sharing what their version of the product is going to do next, what it is and what's going to happen. So if a product manager comes in and says, hey, with this next flavor of what we're doing, we're going to get 13% more clicks, more engagement. The first question, if they don't answer it themselves, is always, okay, great, but what's the member experience like? The user experience. And if the answer is, oh, well, did I mention it was 13% more clicks? The meeting just kind of stops. And then it becomes an object lesson on our number one value, which is members first, because we know that if we don't take care of our members, if we don't have them in mind first, we don't have a business to build. And then one more example. So I led customer service for a long time. I was in Omaha visiting my team of customer service agents, and a young woman had this little sticky note on her monitor that said grandma. And we were just chatting next to her monitor. I said, what's the note about grandma? And she said, oh, well, look, like sometimes this job can get really hard, right? Sometimes I'm handling 40 or 50 or 100 customer service questions every day, and that can get old, right? And so what I do is I think about my grandma, and I really love my grandma. And I imagine, how would I change if my grandma was on the other end of this phone call, or the other end of this next chat or email that I'm going to do? And then I take a deep breath, and then I answer the question as if it were my grandma, right? So all of these things kind of at the personal level or at the organizational level, are ways that we can move from me to we thinking and be compassionate.
Excellent. Another question, if you're not the senior leader on the team, how do you encourage senior leaders to promote psychological safety and connection, particularly in a virtual environment when personal connection, speaking to the point you were just adding to, checking in and mindfulness aren't currently priorities?
Sure. So one thing we can always do is model the behavior we want to see in the world, right? And so oftentimes that's the most powerful thing we can do, is just model that behavior. And by osmosis, it happens around us. But beyond that, we can have a conversation with these leaders. We can point out the research. You can look up, Google's Project Aristotle. Maybe Betty, I have some resources to share more broadly. I have some playbooks about how to bring mindfulness to your company, but share some of this research and and when sharing, what I find works best is to always share about your own experience, right? Because I always say, look, I'm only an expert in me. I'm only an expert in my experience. And here's why this topic matters to me. And because it matters to me, probably it matters to other people. And so it's just food for thought. When we come at it from a different tone, sometimes I have failed in that regard before as well. So bring your own experience.
Excellent. What about the how, when we're operationalizing compassion and measuring it, how do you align that with performance measures, with raises and promotions, incorporating into these data points?
That is a great question. These things, when we get into things like performance ratings, then we have to have alignment with how things are done at the company, right? What are the processes? What are the procedures? What are the policies? How do we measure people at the end? So look, if the head of sales is saying, don't sell customers stuff they don't need, but we only measure quota as a way to, reward people, then we have a disconnect. And so it does require, as an individual leader, it's easy enough because we can look out and see the behaviors we're trying to have out there. As an organization, it really requires some concerted effort across the organization to build it in as part of the culture. And so leader by leader, person by person is how we make this happen, unless, we're at the very top and can make those policy decisions.
Great. Last question for you. I'm actually going to combine two that have come in that are very important as a whole. And again, recognizing today's anniversary and honoring the life of George Floyd and where we are in this moment in racial justice and where we need to be. Thinking about BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, how do we build psychological safety while keeping individuals from diverse lived experiences in mind? And then the parallel question there is, have you had success getting mindfulness implemented in the workplace cross-culturally? And what are some of the tensions and words of wisdom you can leave us with, Scott?
Sure. So compassion. So I'll talk about psychological safety first in a broad sense in terms of compassion, right? So I talk about compassion as having awareness of others, a mindset of wishing the best for them, and then the courage to take action. And I think that is true. I mean, I hate to generalize, but it is true of all flavors, BIPOC or every other flavor. It follows the same kind of recipe. First, deeply understanding each other. And so we're collectively trying to understand each other a lot more with all of the diversity, inclusion, belonging efforts that are out there. Second is having a mindset of wishing the best for each other, or a mindset of kindness. And third is the courage to take action. And I think this recipe is underpinning for all groups, right? If we deeply understand each other, we wish the best for each other, and we do the hard work on behalf of each other, then the rest will flow. And that is true of at least in my experience, only my experience. It's true of all cultures that I have seen. And I think that when we come from this broad underpinning, it is successful in different cultures. It needs to be fine-tuned for each flavor of what we're doing, but it does start with this broad base.
Great. I know for me, I think of the words courage and compassion as side by side. And in my opinion. You can't be compassionate truly if you're not being courageous. So I really value what you've shared. Thank you so much for your time. For everyone who's tuned in, you can order the Full Body Yes through your local bookstores in Pittsburgh. Check out White Whale Bookstore or any other local bookstore in your neighborhood. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Now, we are going to move on to our panelist conversation, reflecting on Scott's message and his experience in the workplace. But now we're going to be joined by three panelists. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tanya Bass, who is Senior Manager of Health Equity at Active Minds, the nation's premier nonprofit organization supporting mental health awareness and education for young adults. She served as program supervisor managing cultural and community initiatives in the North Carolina Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities, where she worked with agencies and individuals to advance racial justice, health equity, and inclusion. We also have with us Julius Boatwright, who serves, getting a little high there, Julius, serves as the founder and chief executive officer with Steel Smiling. He's a licensed master social worker who completed a trauma-informed community practice workshop with Duquesne University through their Department of Psychology and Rita McGinley Clinic. And we also have Counselor Jeremy Loveday, who is a Victoria City Councilor and CRD Director, who fights to make Victoria more equitable, affordable, vibrant, and inclusive. He is also an award-winning poet and spoken word artist, a 2017 Next City Vanguard Fellow, and is currently undertaking an MBA focused on innovation and the circular economy. Welcome all. So we just heard from Scott about the importance of mindfulness and compassion in the workplace. And we're going to get to know each of you a little bit better and the work you're leading on the grounds across the US, in Pittsburgh, and in Canada. We'll be opening the floor to questions from the audience once again in about 15 minutes or so. So please keep those coming via the Q&A or the comments feature if you're tuning in on Facebook Live. So this is a question for all of you. Just take a moment and have, share a bit about your journey story as it relates to working with mental health, whether it's a personal passion, part of your day-to-day work, why you care about this work. Julius, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Thanks again for this opportunity. I'm really grateful to be here. You know that this work is very near and dear to my heart, so I really appreciate the opportunity. So for me, when I think about the why, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm 37 years old now, and I know dating back to when I was 17 years old as a teenager, I knew that I was experiencing some kind of symptoms related to anxiety and depression, but I didn't really have the language for what I was going through at that moment. Growing up in housing projects, my parents didn't really talk about mental health, so it wasn't something that we had discussions about at the kitchen table. I just knew at that moment that I was experiencing something different. And now, 20 years later, I have the language for it. I know what I'm experiencing, and I have the tools and resources to be able to not only support myself, but try to support others as best as I can around me. So that has been one thing that just really, really motivates and inspires me to do this work. I think our lived experiences are so powerful and so important. And there's just power in peer support and sharing your story with others. So a little bit of a glimpse into my why, but it really keeps me motivated and inspired to do this work day in and day out.
Thank you, Julius. Jeremy, why don't you go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's an honor to be here and be on this panel. I'm coming to you virtually from Victoria, BC, Canada. I'm on the homelands of the Lekwungen people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And as a settler, I'm on a lifelong journey of learning and unlearning what it means to be on these lands in a good way. I come to be passionate about mental health through personal experience as well. I live with some anxiety, and it used to be worse before I had the tools to deal with it, which I think is probably a common theme. also have loved ones who have suffered debilitating depression, and seeing that firsthand has also made me passionate about mental health. And then, once you start talking about it, you realize how many people it impacts. And so I try to bring this lens with me, and the need for holistic, preventative mental health care that's rooted in equity into every situation that I'm in. So as a city councillor, that means looking at how do we build healthier cities. And I've seen this on social media posted before. When we're looking at how to build belonging into cities, we need to think of it from an approach that all of our decisions are impacting that. Affordable housing is mental health care. Food security is mental health care. Access to nature is mental health care. Placemaking, living wage policies, these all have an impact on mental health. And in Canada, we're fortunate to have a universal public health care system, which means that anyone can access healthcare for free. Unfortunately, traditionally, and to this day, mental health care hasn't received the same value or attention, and so it is excluded from our healthcare system. So we're still in a situation, even though our healthcare system does, I can go to a doctor for free, which is something we need to keep fighting for. But to go to a counselor, it's $150 or $180 for an hour. And that means that people are choosing whether to get that help or to pay rent or put food on the table. And those are decisions that no one should have to make. And in Canada, it's healthcare is traditionally at the provincial or federal level, but because it has been not addressed, not supported, and downloaded, it has been the realm of municipal governments to a greater extent. So looking forward to the chat, and I'll talk more about being a poet maybe later.
Terrific. Thank you, Jeremy. Dr. Bass, Tanya.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here in North Carolina, but I'm representing Active Minds, which is a national organization based out of Washington, D.C. And as you both were talking, I was just thinking about how I came into this place and being, having both a personal and a professional connection to mental health. So I came into my profession as a public health practitioner, public health educator. And one of the first things I noticed was that there was a difference and a fragment in the work of public health and mental health. But I'm certainly one who understands and values that mental health is public health. And as Jeremy was mentioning, all those social determinants and the drivers of health and wellness do play a vital role in our mental health and our mental wellness. It is a part of my day-to-day work also. A lot of my work really looks at supporting marginalized communities, especially young people and students of color, those who may be LGBTQIA+ individuals, and really trying to address the stigma associated with discussing and seeking services and having access to the resources that we need to take care of our mental health and wellness. And it's important for me in the work that I do to address intergenerational trauma, racialized trauma, and supporting communities in navigating the trauma that we all have experienced. And so with this, my work at Active Minds really involves supporting young people who identify as LGBTQ or BIPOC or both, and any other intersecting identities that they're navigating and maintaining a sense of mental wellness. I'd love to talk more later about one of our projects, which is Your Voice is Your Power, which is specifically related to supporting BIPOC or young people, students of color, and addressing the stigma and changing the culture on their college and their high school campuses. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Tanya. We'll definitely get to that and the importance of working with young people as a whole. So thank you so much for that. Julius, let's go back to you. In an interview for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, you said that employers must incorporate mental health protections into their human resource policies. Politicians must fight for mental health legislation. Nonprofit organizations must include mental health trainings that are culturally sensitive for their team members. Why is it so important that these employers, and we've heard some of the why already, but I'd love to hear from you, your take. Why is it so important that these employers incorporate mental health into their policies, and what role does cultural sensitivity need to play in these policies?
Yeah, I think it's of vital importance to do that. And I talk about the three P's, right? Policies, procedures, and practices. So we saw this uptick in folks that were asking for anti-racist trainings and trainings on cultural sensitivity over the past 14 months. And I like to say that's an excellent start, but it's just that. It's a start. And I also believe that we can't train our way out of racism. We can't train away the racist culture that we live in. So it has to become a part of our lifestyle. It has to be embedded. And first, we have to uproot also some of these policies, practices, and procedures that we know are dated, that we know are further oppressing marginalized folks and folks who are living at the intersection of these identities, as mentioned earlier. So it's of the utmost importance, and as was mentioned earlier too, like it actually does produce results, not just results from a bottom line standpoint, but like personal satisfaction, mental, emotional, and spiritual development. And I find on our team, we encourage everyone to take that 1 to 2 hours every week for self-care. My staff is encouraging me. They're like, Julius, did you take your 1 to 2 hours of self-care? And I'm like, of course I didn't, but I'm going to now, right? Like, so we're developing this organizational culture where it's like we're encouraging each other to practice self-care, and we're holding ourselves accountable and knowing that we don't always get it right. Our board holds me accountable, knowing that I don't always get it right. But if we're constantly striving for this environment that is emotionally safe, then our colleagues and folks that we collaborate with can show up as their true, authentic selves. And that's when the real transformational work actually happens, locally, regionally, nationally, and globally as well.
Excellent. Kind of coming back also to the correlation that Scott was making with the modeling of the behavior and the osmosis, right? Carry it forward and building that tribe of folks that are walking the walk. Jeremy, you're passionate about mental health, as you said, in both your personal and professional lives. Let's focus in first on the policymaking side and then get to the poet part. With policymaking in Victoria, can you share some light on your work as a counselor, and specifically how you've taken some, this big work that's happening across Canada, but how it also comes down to this hyper localized policy making leading that you've been a part of, and it needs to happen on the ground at a hyper local level. Can you share how you've seen the conversation around mental health evolve, again, whether it's that big picture across Canada or hyper locally in your work?
Yeah, in policymaking at the city level, I think it intersects with almost every decision we make. Land use planning, and when we're designing a public space and making sure it's a place that's going to be safe and inclusive, making sure that it's accessible for everyone. We know that access to the outdoor spaces is key, especially within a city where you're constantly bombarded with stimulus, and when you're someone who's living in a small space or a shared space, and we've seen this during COVID, we need places to have a little space to ourselves outdoors as well. So that's one small aspect of it. I think the biggest place we're seeing it right now is where there's a push to have mental health response that is civilian rather than police-led. We have, because we don't have a universal mental health care system, the gaps are filled by the institutions that are there. And that, in our case and in many places, is policing. And that is not the best way. And in fact, it can cause harm, tragedy, violence, and that disproportionately impacts BIPOC people and people who are in poverty. And so I think we need to create an alternate response system, and that's something that we're working on right now as a city. And it's been many years in the works, but we're finally making headway, which I think is really exciting and also long overdue to have a healthcare response to healthcare issues.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, take us into your poetry side and spoken word and just the role of the arts in general. We know that the arts are healing, right? It brings people together. There's so many factors at play that can impact our mental health in the best of ways and help us heal and be cathartic experiences. At least that's my take. So that's my stump speech for the arts and all things. But tell us a bit more about how you got into poetry, spoken word, and how you see that intersection.
Yeah, everyone needs an outlet, I believe, whether that's, the Scott, as the keynote was talking about, physical activity, that's important. For me, I need both physical activity and I need an artistic outlet to be okay and to have a place to speak about the things that I'm going through, the things I'm feeling, and to have that psychological safety to be vulnerable and to share those experiences. And, that stems from, I think I got into spoken word as a teenager. And since then, I've ran a youth arts festival for the last 12 years called Victorious Voices, which seeks to provide that platform for young people who otherwise might not feel that their voices are valued or are able to be heard. And so that festival continues to be the highlight of my year because I get to hear from youth poets and hear their raw truth of their experience and also build community of truth speaking and sharing stories. So I think that builds community, it builds belonging. And, we aim to do that in a safe way. And so I think that outlet can be transformational in terms of giving people that sense that they're in the right place and that they will be okay.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I want to come back to all of you and ask what, in a moment, what other countries or cities, places you take inspiration from, because Jeremy, just listening to you talk, and I see Tanya was commenting here in the comments, there is so many great lessons from the work that you're leading and from Canada as a whole, both in your honoring of Indigenous lands. That's something that I experienced for the first time in Canada a few years ago, and it's certainly now gaining greater influence in the US, to, as Tanya pointed out, the health equity in all policies. So there's so much we don't need to reinvent, right? The work is out there in other places, and how are we learning and sharing and then codifying it, right? So this point on policies, it needs to be codified and in your budget. Tanya, why don't we kick it back to you and let us know how the work that you're doing at Active Minds, of the importance of youth, how you're changing the conversation around mental health across the US. And you're doing it in a way that centers young people. And you've now done it both at a statewide role in North Carolina, but again, now you're working US-wide. Can you, what do you want people to most understand as it relates to mental health and working with folks who have diverse lived experiences?
Yeah, I think it's super important, in particular for all people. But when I think about young people, one of the biggest things that comes to my mind is the work of Patricia Hill Collins in talking about intersectionality, and that young people are often the most impacted and understand intersectionality and oppression based on their experience about being a young person and their age. And so as we think about all the things happening in the world and the impact on their various identities, in particular age, their sexual identity, their race and ethnic identity, their citizenship, their socioeconomic class, if we think about all the pressures surrounding them and navigating a world that is very much difficult to navigate even as an adult, that we have to make space and change the narrative around taking care of our mental health and understanding that we all have mental health, although some of us may not have a diagnosed mental illness, but we have to take care of it just like if you were talking about exercising, I appreciate what you offered, Jeremy, about that outlet. Is like, as much emphasis as we place on taking care of our physical health, we have to do the same around our mental health as well. So at Active Minds, that's the change and the shift we're trying to make with young people, starting with them in their high schools, but also carrying through and creating chapters and working on college campuses to even impact the faculty and staff in those places as well.
Let's stay with you, Tanya, for a moment and talk about the stigma, right? The narrative shift that you're working on at Active Minds, and that you have all spoken to in different ways, right? We need to change the narrative. Are there any anything that you believe that is playing a particular role? Any examples of how to do this? Anything that we can use in our own language, in our own thinking, to destigmatize mental health and change the narrative?
I think part of that is making services and seeking services more culturally appropriate and responsive. So I think there's oftentimes the stigma or this assumption that people of color don't need mental health, or our cultural backgrounds. Like, you can, I'm in North Carolina, I'm a Southerner. I think you can love Jesus and have a therapist all at the same time. And to, make sure that we are being culturally appropriate, and that even if you can't seek out a therapist of color or, have those services, that you're training the providers to be culturally responsive in the care that they're providing. That's what I think is most important. Is like, I think Julius was mentioning, we're not going to train our way out of it, but we have to ensure that providers are equipped to support individuals when they come to them. And then we also have to ensure that we're creating a space that all people would be comfortable seeking out these services.
Julius, can you speak to this as well? I know you're leading really important work in the Pittsburgh region, working with Black Pittsburghers and broader community as well. Can you say more about the stigma and breaking past it?
Yeah, I will take a slightly complementary approach to it and say that in the work that we've been doing with Black youth, Black adults, and Black elders, is that they are so welcoming to receiving mental health support, and whether it be training, clinical level counseling, the advocacy work that comes with it, the group peer support sessions that we have. I have endless stories of Black folks saying they wish that they would have had these kind of groups and trainings years ago and decades ago, right? Maybe some of their friends and their loved ones would have been able to participate in them. So we're hearing the opposite around the narrative. So I think it's also important for us to tell both narratives, that while there is stigma, there's this emerging narrative that Black folks are like, they're healing, and they're saying, where are the mental health, where are the culturally responsive and culturally sensitive mental health providers? And they understand the difference in medication and what this type of medicine will do for their mental health treatment journey. They're informed, they're being proactive, and I think as Jeremy mentioned earlier, they're taking up the work in their community because they're at the sporting events, they're at the cookouts, they're at on the stoop with grandma or the uncle or the sibling, and they're having these conversations. So they are essentially being the first responders. So we have to invest in them from my perspective.
Excellent. Knowledge is power, right? So now that there's more information, there's more knowledge, it's changing the narrative, changing our behavior, changing our expectations and what we're demanding and wanting in return. So that's really, really powerful to hear, Julius. Do any of you, Jeremy, Tanya, Julius, are there cities or other parts of the world that you look to, other communities that you've been inspired by that have really shaped your thinking here, that you lean on as examples in the work that you're doing?
I'll jump in. I don't have a specific city that I think is doing everything right. It's kind of picking the pieces that seem to be working. Like just listening to Tanya and Julius, I'm learning a lot, and there's things I feel like I can take back. And so I think it's a constant understanding that we don't need to reinvent everything, that things are working in other places, and it's trying to find those stories and then making sure that it makes sense in the local context. Also, never trying to apply a solution to a community where it's not designed by and for the people of that community. So I think that is also key to success. But there's some things that we know at the municipal level does work, like investing in libraries and community centers and ethno-cultural programming. And those things are often the first places where cuts happen in hard economic times. And so making sure we're pushing back against that type of austerity and continuing to invest in communities, I think. For me, that's what it comes back to, but learning, constantly trying to listen and learn from all locations.
Excellent. I know, Tanya, you were going to get in as well, so I'll turn to you in a moment here. But the importance of language also is something that strikes me listening to the three of you, and also Scott's message. So language being a continuous evolving, we're constantly learning, right? We may not have all been using our pronouns 10 years ago. Maybe I wasn't until a couple of years ago. But as I learn and evolve in this journey, again, I'll share one personal story. My grandmother died by suicide. I didn't use that framing before. I used different language. And then I learned why that language was harmful, and I stopped using it. So these are also lessons that we can take in how we talk about communities, by listening to them and how the experts and the communities themselves want the language to be used. Tanya.
One of the things I was going to say as an example, I think it's out of Kings County in Washington State. There's a tool, a racial equity toolkit that I know in North Carolina we adopted to look at some of our programs and like how where we might have been missing the mark around being equitable and inclusive. And we've used that tool recently internally at Active Minds to ensure that we are just doing our best. We want to be more than performative. We want to go beyond more than having a statement. We actually want to look at where the gaps are in our services and how to improve on them. And to your point about language, it is so important to continue the learning. And then when you know, then you can actually do and actually change the language. I know that many people are dealing with microaggressions. And I know there are some folks who are the aggressor, who are intentional in their discrimination and blatant and wanting to be harmful. But oftentimes these microaggressions happen because people don't know the language that is hurtful. And so I think that as we're growing, we'll learn and we can reduce these experiences of marginalized individuals as people learn and then actually act to do better.
Excellent. We have a question from the audience regarding working with young adults. And I think you've all touched in different ways the importance of youth. Tanya, let's stay with you since that work is at the heart of what you do every day, but I'd like to go down the line and hear each of you. How can, Diana is asking, how can I impart mindfulness? How can I impart the importance of, mental health, compassion, what we've been talking about here today with young people, with young adults?
I think one of the greatest things that anyone can do is modeling it. I think it was Julius was saying, holding each other accountable. Your staff was checking in with you. They want you to be the model for them. What we know is that when we see it from individuals that we look up to, folks who might be in positions of power, they'll take the lead from that and they'll follow that lead. So modeling it and making it normal, like we're normalizing taking care of our mental health and wellness. That's my first thought.
Great. Julius or Jeremy?
Yeah, I'll add that my current executive coach always says that what people co-create, they sustain. And I think that oftentimes as adults, we try to dictate and determine what programming and experiences look and feel like for young adults. And with some of the youth program that we just launched, the youth are there every step of the way, helping us with curriculum, program development, talking about mindfulness and does mindfulness, is it going to work for all of them? Is it a one size fits all approach? How can we incorporate art and music and drawing and journaling and African drumming, whatever the case may be, thinking from an innovative perspective and outside of the box when it comes to therapeutic interventions, whether formal or informal. So I think at the heart of this is the co-creation and really taking the lead from the young folks and not just assuming that as experts and adults, we know what's right for them.
Great, Jeremy.
I wrote that down. What we co-create, we sustain. I think that nails it, and that applies both to my work in running a youth program through spoken word, where the organizing team is all youth except for me, and that I find that in a lot of ways they're ahead of me. They're ahead of the institutions. And we just have to listen, that there has been culture change that's happened, and we need to keep up a lot of times. And so that is one piece of it. And then at the city, it's similar. Like we've had initiatives, youth-led initiatives. We had one declaring City Hall a stigma-free zone, and it was great. There was lots of momentum, but then the hard part is creating the cultural shift within the organization that's going to allow that to be sustained. And so I think listening to the youth is really important, and making sure that any decisions that are happening, they're at the table for.
Excellent. Julius, you mentioned also having an executive coach, and you kind of said that in passing, but that also is such an important piece of normalizing getting that coaching, right? Getting, whether it's an executive coach, having a mentor, having somebody that you can trust that's a sounding board that also, I'm sure, reminds you that your experience isn't alone, that they've been there too. Normalizing talking about therapy, right, is also a part of this reality. Any other thoughts as it relates to some of the tactical ways that folks can take on a day-to-day basis to normalize this language, normalize our own culture, heal our trauma from past generations, but while also embracing our past generations' roots? Anything you would like our audience to keep in mind as they're processing all of this big topic and really synthesizing it to, okay, what can I do now as an individual? What can I do now as a community member? What can I do now as working with policymakers if I want to see actual movement in mental health becoming a priority in my life, in my community?
Yeah, I would say that we talk about self-care a lot. I'm actually a strong supporter of more of collective care. I think it takes, we talked about, right, moving from the I to the we, I think earlier in our keynote. So I'm a strong proponent of collective care. With that being said, though, around the self-care component, I think it would be amazing if as many people in the world as possible had an individualized self-care plan. They've got templates. Some are a little bit more comprehensive than others on different evidence-based therapeutic websites that are on the web. That a lot of these tools and documents are free, and you might have to do some finessing to make sure they're culturally responsive and sensitive to the dynamic needs of each individual. But on your self-care plan, you're listing who to contact in case of a crisis, right? Who's your one trusted person? Who are your three trusted people that whenever you don't have the wherewithal or the motivation, or you're not in the right frame of mind to pick up the phone or text, that a trusted friend or peer or loved one has access to your self-care plan, and they can go and they can see as much as you're comfortable with sharing on it. They can see if you put what kind of medications you're currently on. They can see if you're seeing a counselor. They can see some of your stressors and triggers. So now you don't have to walk through this journey alone. You have a tangible tool that you can utilize as a personal reminder, and that you can share again with other trusted people, so they know, okay, Julius is experiencing a mental health moment. I have access to a self-care plan, and I'm going to be the best possible advocate and support for him, because his plan is telling me what he needs, and it's updated regularly, because we're updating regularly as humans.
I love that collective care from me to we, what Scott was saying, and building that community, that village. We do have a question we have a couple questions coming in from the audience. One is going back to this point on intergenerational impact. What does this look like? And this person's asking specifically in the workplace, but thinking about that, the intergenerational sometimes divide and learning opportunities. What does it look like for generations that do not grasp mindfulness and other generations that fully embrace it? So any suggestions on that? Maybe something you've learned from young people on how to bring others along for whom this is totally new language, totally new experiences. I also appreciated the point made earlier that even this idea of like going on a run or going to the gym, that's newer, right? It's not something my grandfather or great grandparents were doing. So how do we bridge that intergenerational gap to better equip folks across all ages, from young ones to older adults, to have a shared language, or at least try to build towards a shared understanding?
I'll just jump in to say that I think there's a level of not having the language, but I think there's more so a level of like actually doing it and not realizing that's what's actually happening. When we think about the way people cope and the way people support one another, I doubt my grandmother, who was 98, would say that her ability to think and stop and pause would be mindfulness and care, and the way she cared for others in the community, but then also took out time to say, okay, I can't do that, like utilizing her boundaries. She probably wouldn't use the word boundaries or mindfulness, but that's the practice that she was doing. So I think it's more so observing and realizing that it's happening, and it's just a new way of saying it. Like, I'm using the term health equity. That's something that when I started out in my career, people didn't use it. They were talking about eliminating health disparities, but ultimately we wanted to ensure that all people had the ability to live a better quality of life, which ultimately was health equity. So I think it's a language shift, but when we really dig down to what the behavior and the actions are, people are practicing it. It's just putting a new nuance on it.
Great. Last question for all of you. We want to hear either who is your mindfulness, your mental health hero, and or you can take whichever one you want. What are some of the things that you're doing each day to go further in your journey towards mindfulness, compassion, and mental health?
Okay, I feel like I keep going first, so I'm just gonna do it because I actually want to hear what Julius and Jeremy have to say. But one of the things that I have, I'm newly minted, Dr. Bass, so I just came off of the long doctoral process, and during that process and having the experience of going through it during COVID, one of the things I am doing more is I'm celebrating every win, regardless of how small. Every bit of progress, even if I was able to take a nap or just take some time to think and be alone, or at that point writing one sentence, I'm celebrating all the small, or I don't even call it small, every step forward, and every time that I'm able to take care of myself, I'm celebrating that.
Good for you. Love it.
I will add that I am saying no more than I've ever said no before in my life. And I am a yes kind of person. I am constantly saying yes to people, to projects, to everything. Yes, yes, yes. And now I'm being very intentional about asking, is this something that really aligns with my why, and why I want to do something? So I'm setting those boundaries, and saying no way more often than I usually do.
Excellent. Excellent reminder. Sometimes we have to create, as I take inspiration from a Black entrepreneur, Mess in a Bottle, had said, and a quote that I read once, boundaries from ourselves sometimes are important, right? We can preach to others, but we forget to create our own boundaries and take those self-care breaks. Jeremy.
Yeah, first, congratulations, Dr. Bass. I wish I was saying no more. It's a goal, and something I think one of the ways I'm focusing. I do a little bit each day of trying to write a little bit of poetry each day. I try to do a little bit of work outside. I'm lucky to have a garden, and so to work, have a little bit of outside time without phones or computers. And I'm also trying to think of ways I can bring, COVID has been very isolating, but there's also been some positive things in terms of people checking in on each other. I think mutual aid and that kind of community care has been brought to a new level, at least in my community, and I think in many communities. And so trying to think of how we can bring those things as we get back to a new normal eventually, hopefully soon, and learn some of those lessons. And one of the personal things of that is, for me, I'm hoping to be like Julius and say no a bit more, to make sure things are serving me and that they're making the difference I'm trying to make.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for your time. We're going to close out now. We have more questions that have come in. We will be sending resources to everyone. Some of those questions are about, again, this intergenerational piece. I encourage anyone who's tuning in to check out age-friendly initiatives in your communities. These are global initiatives by the WHO and AARP that have partnered together. So we have age-friendly Greater Pittsburgh, and there are age-friendly initiatives across the world. And we'll be putting in some resources for everyone, as well as on the inclusion piece. How are we bridging the gap around mental health and diversity, equity, and inclusion? So more to follow there. So much more we can continue to talk about. For now, thank you to our keynote speaker, Scott Shute. Thank you to Dr. Tanya Bass, Julius Boatwright, Counselor Jeremy Loveday for this incredible conversation on this important topic, again, on Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you to Vibrant Pittsburgh, who supported today's program as a co-sponsor. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey that's in the chat. It's only 3 questions, and it really helps to shape our programs and future. If you enjoyed our virtual program, please consider supporting the council by making a donation today. You can help us further our mission and continue our work by providing community programming at worldspittsburgh.org/donate. Today's program was recorded, and all attendees are going to receive this in a follow-up. Thank you all so much. Until next time, happy Mental Health Month, today and every month.